Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me today for our session in our today's session in our wellness series. Today we're going to be focusing on self-care in the heavily digital world. I think we can all agree that this is probably needed more than ever with the last year that has been, and into the future as well. I think our lives become more and more focused on screens, and I think our minds and our bodies and our souls are sort of screaming out for a little bit less time off. And so I'm really glad that you're able to join me today. I do tend to take a fairly relaxed approach to the workshops, and if you were a pretty small group, I think today, so if you feel so inclined and want to jump on the microphone, I'd love to hear your voices. I think other people might like to hear voices other than mine as well, so if you're feeling like that is a way of communicating, that's wonderful. Or you're more than welcome to chat in the chat box. I love the idea of sharing with each other, and it's all learning and growing together too. So the chat box is a wonderful way of doing that, of course. And if you're quieter today, that's okay too. Just however you're showing up, and if you just want to just soak in and not really share in the chat box on the microphone, that's okay too. Really, just however you're showing up is wonderful, and I'm really thankful that you're sharing this time with me. So I'm not sure where in the world you're joining me from. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to see that in the chat box though. But I am joining in from my home in Victoria. And I guess the place that joins us all together is the beautiful campus of Royal Roads, which sits upon the lands of the Lekwungen and Kisipson First Nations families. And on a day like today, I am so thrilled to be able to share that space and have the privilege of working there and learning there, for you folks studying there. Today in Victoria is an absolutely stunning summer day, which feels fitting for June 2nd. The sun is shining, the flowers are bursting into bloom, and I have a little bit of a heaviness of heart that we're not on campus, because I know at this time of year the gardens there and the grounds there are just so lush and so beautiful. So little heaviness of heart as I think about Royal Roads campus, but really hoping that we'll be able to all join there together soon. Great, we've got Cindy some cameras, wonderful. And thank you, Stephen, for acknowledging you're in Coast Salish territory. Wonderful, thank you and welcome. So today, for those of you who may have joined one of our sessions before, you'll know that we always start with a check-in and a grounding exercise, which will take a few minutes to do. And then we'll dive right into the purpose of our time together today, which is really focusing on self-care. And we're going to look at what it is, what are the barriers, checking on our own personal needs. We've got a couple of tools that I offer for you to check in with your own self-care. We'll talk a little bit about managing our screen time with some strategies for that. And then at the end of our sessions, we always do, if we have time, another grounding exercise and checkout. So let's dive right in. In Collaborate, the pencil is usually at the top left-hand corner of your screen. So if you're up for that, maybe grab a pencil and take a moment just to check in with yourself and how you're feeling. And maybe one of those pictures on the screen represents how you're feeling, or maybe none of them do. Maybe there's another word you feel like typing in the chat box, or maybe you just want to just take a moment just quietly to reflect for your own just kind of personal experience. Great, someone's reflected that they're feeling quiet today. Yeah, I have that kind of quietness around me today, and I'm feeling kind of happy, which is nice. So a mix between quiet and happy. Some tiredness, yeah. And it's totally wonderful however you're showing up today. There's no right or wrong answers for these kind of questions. It's just a moment to, in a very busy world, very busy lives, just slow things down and check in and see how we're doing. And this is one of the first steps in self-care too, is slowing down and just checking in how we're doing. Another way we can do that is on a scale of 1 to 5. We can check in with ourselves about how much stress we're feeling in this moment. So where 1 is sort of no stress at all, kind of cool as a cucumber, and 5 is like where we're starting to feel pretty maxed out, maybe kind of feeling quite overwhelmed. Whereabouts are you kind of sitting on that scale at the moment? Great, thanks for sharing. I'm probably, yeah, right in the middle there on a 2.5 today. What I like about this exercise is we can use it any time, and just to check in with ourselves. And if we're at a 4 or a 5, that's okay. It's quite normal for us human beings who live busy lives to slip up into a 4 or a 5. But what we want to really do is not get stuck there. And if we find ourselves getting stuck there, that's okay too. It's just maybe an indicator, a cue that maybe we need to reach out for some extra support. And I'll show you how I can reach myself and my colleagues towards the end of the session too. So it's okay to slip up there. It's really normal, but we just don't want to get stuck there. And then if we're just kind of sliding up there, we can maybe stop and reflect and say, what's one small thing I could do to help me move down half a notch or a notch? On the other end of the scale, if you're sort of the 1s or 2s, that's really wonderful. And we can check in with ourselves then and consider, well, what's making that so? What's happening in your life that is helping you to stay down at that 1 or 2? Oftentimes we spend a lot of time reflecting on what's making us feel kind of crummy or anxious or depressed. We don't spend equal amounts of time reflecting on what's making us feel well, what's making us feel good. So that can be a nice exercise too. Great. And wonderful. Alison, welcome, joining from Rocky View County. Oh gosh, so yeah, the new courses often make that nervous energy peak sometimes. So thank you so much for joining us wherever all of you are at today. This is just, for me, such a gift to be able to connect with you, and I hope that I have something that you'll be able to take away with you, and hopefully that, you know, the 4 end of the scale will maybe hopefully be able to help you find some ways to start to bring that down a little bit. So thanks to all of you for joining in today. So I thought we'd start our grounding today with just some really simple belly breathing. For some people, this is something that they already have a practice of mindfulness that they do, and this will be really familiar territory. For others, this might be something that you've kind of heard about but have never actually experienced or tried before. So what I'll do is I'll just walk us through just 4 or 5 belly breaths together, and I'll invite you to join along if you feel comfortable doing that wherever you are. If you don't feel comfortable, you're not able to, that's okay too. You just listen to my voice and see what I'm doing, and then maybe this is something you can practice some other time by yourselves. So I invite you to just, wherever you're at, start to get comfortable and just sit comfortably in your chair. Maybe I always check in with my shoulders because I tend to hold a lot of my stress in my shoulders and my neck. And I invite you, if you feel comfortable, just to close your eyes or soften your gaze. And then simply start to notice. Just notice your breath and where your breath is today, this beautiful breath that serves us every minute of every day. I'm just being really thankful that it's there. And every time I do this, it's kind of makes me smile, because every time I do this, I notice my breath is usually right here in my chest. And that makes sense. When I'm about to do a workshop, I do feel a little bit of nerves. My breath gets a bit more shallow. So what I want to do is I'm just going to move my hand from my chest, move it down onto my belly. I'm going to work towards getting some beautiful belly breaths. They're a little longer and deeper, and they'll help sort of calm my nervous system down. So if you feel comfortable, just pop your hand on your belly. You should start to notice your hand gently rising and falling as you breathe in and out. Just notice where it is right now. And all together, I'm going to take us through 4 or 5 deep breaths together. So we'll breathe in for a count of 4 and then hold and then breathe out for a count of 4. So ready? We'll breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold and breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold and breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold and breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold and breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Do one more breath all together. Breathe in and hold and breathe out. Now as you turn your attention back to our time together and allow your breath just to return to the natural rhythm it wants to go to. Let's take a moment to check in with how you're feeling, how your body's feeling. For some people that might have a pretty really nice sort of calming influence. I practice this a lot, so it tends to have that kind of effect on me. For other people, sometimes if you're not used to it, can make you feel a little anxious. So that's okay. Maybe just practice this sometimes when are this moment. But just check in with you, however you're doing. Some people might not have any effect at all. Again, it does take practice to build that up. I'll just take a moment because breath is such an interesting thing where we know more about it than ever before. I think it's a practice of many different cultures and mindfulness practices. I recently heard about a book called Breath, which I've got the wait list on it from the library, and I think there were 72 people ahead of me, so I think there's quite a lot of interest in it. But apparently it's a really beautiful book around breath that ties sort of the history of it and some mindfulness practices and the science behind it as well. So that might be an interesting piece of reading. And also for our breath, it not only helps us relax, but it can actually help us energize too. So some of the sort of neuroscience experts around learning suggest taking some intentional kind of breaths every 30 minutes. If you're focusing on some schoolwork, it'll just help increase the oxygen in your blood and increase the blood flow to the brain. So every 30 minutes doing some breath work can be really helpful to help us on this important work that we're doing as students. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to you for a moment. We've got this little poll that my colleagues and I came up with. I'm just curious about how you're feeling. We're curious about what you're finding most tiring about this particularly digital time. So are there too many conference meetings and videos, too many video conferences and meetings, having challenge staying focused during your class time? Is it challenging working on the computer for work and then on studying online at night, and then sometimes connecting with friends and family? Is it the stressful news you see constantly? Darn technology glitches like the one I had before I started into this session. Are there other things that you're finding most tiring about this particular session? And wonderful, someone's already grabbed the pen and circled what you're finding most tiresome and challenging. And if others feel like they want to join in and scribble on the screen, that's always appreciated too. You're not alone if you are feeling any of these things. This is what we're hearing from students every day in the work that we do as counselors and learning strategists. this is a real struggle for so many of us right now. Darn technology glitches. That's how I felt. Whoever circled that that way. It's been an exercise in patience for me, because I don't know a lot about technology, so when things don't go well, it's a bit stressful. So wonderful. And yeah, working on computer for work and then studying online, it's tough. It's tough to find that transition. It's tough to draw ourselves away for the breaks. It's tough to know when to end. It feels like it's a never-ending list of things to do, or things that are drawing our attention, or just one more task. So that's something we're hearing about often from students. So thank you for sharing how you're experiencing this at the moment. So we know it's not an easy time, and when my wonderful colleagues Sarah and Francis and Rachel were talking about this workshop, we thought about, you know, really wanting to honor that we know it's difficult, we know this isn't easy, and we want to talk about self-care and why it's important. And self-care, I mean, it's something a lot of people talk a lot about, and yet what we hear in our sessions is it's really hard to do. So it sounds really simple and it sounds like a great idea, but sometimes it's one of those things that really really makes it difficult for us to do. And we're going to explore that a little bit together today. And Alison has put in there too, too much sitting creates pain, and then not being able to focus due to pain. Absolutely. It's really like a vicious cycle with that, and that highlights too just this importance of managing ourselves and managing our on-screen time, so that we give our bodies that chance not to recover before do damage. So, so this idea of self-care is any intentional actions that you take to take care of yourself and your well-being. So it covers things like our physical, our emotional, our spiritual, our financial, our social connections. Like, these are all parts of well-being. It's letting ourselves be normal, regular, unexceptional. You know, whatever regular and normal looks like or feels like, but whatever that feels for you, it's just letting yourself just be in that moment and being okay with just being. We sometimes think that self-care has to be something big and elaborate. It has to be, you know, a whole day at a spa, or a trip to Mexico, or, you know, something big like that. And that's true. Those things can be a part of the self-care package. But really what we're talking about today is just these smaller intentional actions that you can take. And, you know, I've heard it defined previously as, how are you caring for yourself? So it's care that you provide for caring for yourself. It's thinking too, sometimes when I think about how we're often much better at caring for other people than we are for ourselves, and yet if we know that a friend was really struggling, we wouldn't necessarily think, oh gosh, I've got to take them to, I don't know, for a whole day hike, although that might be wonderful. We don't have to take them to Disneyland, but we might invite them for a walk. We might take them a pot of, you know, nutritious soup, or just a small gesture to help care for them in their moment of need. So we're just trying to think about that and turning it back on ourselves when we're talking about self-care. So we know self-care sounds easy, it sounds lovely, but we know there are barriers to it. So again, just a little poll, just to check in with ourselves. What are some of the barriers that you face when you're trying to think about doing some self-care? So does it feel like it's too self-serving and you feel guilty for doing it? Are you afraid that others will question your dedication to your professionalism and your academics if you practice self-care? Is it that you're not really sure how to do it? You've heard about this thing, you know other people do it, you know it would be good for you, but you're not sure. Is it too hard to incorporate? Just feel like you just can't figure out how to incorporate it regularly into it, or is it, I don't have time? And again, these are all things that we hear from students as barriers. So if one of these resonates with you, please feel, for many of them resonate with you, please feel free to pick up the pencil and chime in there with what the barriers are. And then, great, someone chimed in with, if you don't, the second last point, if you don't take care of yourself, it diminishes empathy for others. Yeah, absolutely it does. Because if we don't have enough resources for ourselves, we just don't have anything left for others. So really great, thank you. Okay, so self-care is too self-serving, feel guilt. We hear a lot of guilt around self-care, and it's hard to incorporate and get that routine happening. I feel like sometimes too, we're in the thick of it. It can be hard to take that step back and put the foundation of self-care in that's so needed. And hard time. Who has time for self-care? Yeah. And then a question, I guess throughout this whole time, our whole time together today, we've sort of popped in some questions that you might want to jot down and take away and just consider after the session. And one of the questions is, what small thing have you already done to overcome this barrier to your own self-care? Is there a small step that you've already done to create some success and to create a small moment or a pocket of self-care in your life? Because as I said, like, this sounds really easy to do, but it's not. It's not easy for any of us, even those of us who work in the field and know the importance of this. This is not easy stuff. So just reflect on those successes. These moments of success is really powerful too. So there's many ways we can start to check in with ourselves around self-care and what we might need. So the idea of self-care is, in some ways, it can be a pattern or a routine, but in other ways, it can be it can shift the focus of it, or a needs shift and change over time. And this is one of the tools that my wonderful colleague Frances Kinlock, who was a practicum student with us last year, she shared this with us, and it's called the HALT check-in. And back to Alison's point too about this idea of we don't really have the empathy and capacity to care for others if we're not first caring for ourselves. So before we do any major tasks or reach out to other people, it can be really important to halt, just stop, and check in with ourselves. I love how simple this is, because it's basically focusing on those fundamental needs of, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? Just really checking in and being honest with ourselves. Like, have you eaten today? Or, you're trying to dive into an assignment when you skipped lunch. Well, maybe we need to slow things down and stop and get that foundation of self-care happening and have something to eat first. Are you feeling a bit cranky or angry around something? Well, do we need to do something about that first? Take a moment, take some breaths, go for a walk before we engage in an important conversation. You're feeling lonely and that's kind of a heaviness on your heart. Maybe we need to reach out to a friend to give us a little bit of a happy hormone happening before we try to do something like schoolwork, which can sometimes feel pretty isolating. Or you're tired. I think this is a bit of a touchy one for many people who are like, I don't have time to get enough sleep. But really, again, it's this foundation piece that without enough, it can be really hard to do the things or do well at the things that are important to us. So I like this quick, simple check-in, HALT. A little funny aside that my colleague Frances, she did a sex therapy course as well, and during that they were adding an O on there as well and said, orgasm. Have you had an orgasm lately? She thought that was quite amusing. So I don't know, just like these little ways we can check in with each other. And I also like that because it does bring a little bit of humor to it as well. I think that that's something that can also help us find balance when we bring a little bit of a smile to our faces. So another tool that we can use to check in with ourselves around what we might need for our self-care is this idea of a self-care wheel. And you may have seen these. They come in all different shapes and sizes online. This particular one was put up by the Canadian Mental Health Association. And what I really like about this is you can have this, on your wall or somewhere handy, where you can just kind of check in with yourself about how you're feeling. And if you're not feeling at your best, we can look at this wheel and reflect and go, well, which part of this wheel maybe could use a little TLC. So, is it the physical realm that needs a little TLC? Is it the psychological realm that could use some support? Is it our emotional realm, a spiritual realm, a personal or social realm, or is it our professional realm? And any one of these, if you think about a wheel, if any kind of the spokes are a bit damaged or a bit of a bump in the wheel, then the whole system doesn't flow as smoothly. So I like this image. It can be a nice way to just check in with ourselves and have a look at this and go, well, you know, have I been taking care of my physical well-being lately, or have I maybe been missing that? You know, have I spent time to get in touch with my spiritual being, whatever that looks like for you, and some time for self-reflection, or going out into nature, or connecting with your spiritual community. So again, this can be no judgment around this, just a nice reflective tool to check in with ourselves and make sure that we're not sort of letting any one aspect of ourselves go, because we're complex beings. There's so much that makes up us, and we lead such busy lives that sometimes we can forget which part, like what's the important stuff. What's the stuff that we need to focus on, take a moment to step back. I'm aware that when we're feeling like we're in survival mode, which I think some of us, like a lot of our students, are feeling in survival mode when they're busy balancing work and family and school and life in general, this stuff can feel a bit, well, that'd be really nice, but I don't have time for it. And I guess my argument to that is, like, this doesn't need to take a lot of time, right? This doesn't need to take a lot of time to just take a little moment to step back and look at the wheel and just see, is there one small step that you could add a little TLC into your life? And again, that's a question for you to take away with you and consider as you're moving through your days, weeks ahead. So there are lots of tools that we can do to check in with our needs, our self-care needs, but some more questions that you might want to consider that are things sometimes we don't really spend a lot of time with these ones, but for example, we might say, well, when do I feel drained? And if you can identify a particular time in the day or in the week when you feel drained, is there something that you can do to help boost your energy? For me, in the afternoon, around sort of 3 o'clock, my energy often feels like I'm a bit drained. Being Australian, we drink a lot of tea, so around about that time, I usually go, yeah, I need my cup of tea. So I take the moment to boil the kettle and make a nice brew, and that just gives me an energy boost. For other people, they go, their energy feels draining around lunchtime, and getting out for a brisk walk or a stroll through the neighborhood might be what helps them feel a little bit more energy. But can you focus on that and find other like a solution? Or do we need to listen to that and say, I feel drained by 7 o'clock at night, and maybe that's the end of your day. Maybe that's a time when you really start to shut things down a bit more and move more at a different pace through your day. Similarly, we can ask, what makes you anxious? And then what you start to identify those things that make you anxious, and then start to think about what's some small way you can lean into that, or some small way that you can maybe bring that anxiety down a notch or so on the scale. Other questions to consider is what makes you feel nourished and energized, and what's something that you enjoy doing, and have you given that some thought lately? I think a lot of us fill our days with things that we should do, we have to do, and that's important, but what's something that you would like to do, and is there a small way that you can pop that into your life? Again, so what's some small change that you can make just to start to nourish you? What's some small intention that you could set to start to take care of your own well-being? The beautiful thing about self-care is that there's no right or wrong answers in many ways. It really is such a personal journey, and every one of us here today, it will look different. Like what works for me will look very different to what works for you. And I think there's some things that we generally as human beings agree on, like most of us feel better when we go out in nature, but getting there can be more of a chore for some people, so maybe there's maybe that's really just more stressful than you know, phoning a friend. So it's really, I love this idea that self-care isn't prescriptive, but it's just a series of questions that we ask ourselves and check in with ourselves, and then commit to making small steps that work for us. So we know that life, especially life as a student, can become quite stressful. And there's healthy stress and there's unhealthy stress. And if you've joined in some of our workshops before about building resilience, we go into that in a little more depth. But stress is kind of a normal part of life, and sometimes it's a healthy stress that helps us grow and feel motivated to do something, to complete some tasks or assignments, or study for exams. We don't want to get into that overwhelmed stress where we feel like we don't know what to do. Our decision-making capabilities get diminished. We feel brain fog. We spend too much longer on tasks than what we have time for because we just feel like we can't get any traction. That's the kind of stress that we really want to try to minimize the amount of time we spend there. But we all know that we have coping strategies when we feel stressed. And I'm really curious to hear from you folks about what are some coping strategies that help you. And I've already started us off here on the screen. I've got some ideas that I've popped down here, such as getting some sleep, maybe binge watching Netflix, maybe having a drink or so of alcohol, maybe spending some time with friends and family. But I invite you now, I'm going to take a sip of water and invite you now just to give that some thought about what helps you to manage your stress. And feel free to type on the screen or in the chat box, and I'm going to sip some water and give you a moment to join in with that and reflect on that. Lovely walk in nature. One of my favorite things to do too, especially when it's so beautiful out. Give others another moment just in case anyone wants to join in. Me with horses. I'm jealous. That sounds wonderful. Time with animals, yes, can be really wonderful de-stressor. Oh, and painting. Love it. I am not much of an, I'm rethinking this. I was going to say I'm not much of an artist, but I'm rethinking that. I started doing some big chunky knitting lately, and that connection with the creativity has been really, really quite an interesting de-stressor that I hadn't experienced before. So really wonderful, all of these pieces that are helping de-stress. In the counseling realm, we often talk about healthy coping strategies and unhealthy coping strategies, and I really resist that. And I had a conversation with my colleague recently around this idea of healthy and unhealthy coping strategies, and I kind of intentionally put drinking alcohol on there for that reason. And binge watching Netflix, because those would tend to be considered sort of unhealthy coping mechanisms. But I kind of think about coping mechanisms as having different purposes at different times, and some are healthier than others. And certainly if you overdo some of the coping strategies, like for example having a drink of wine, probably not a big deal, probably a nice way to cope or wind down or transition from a busy workday. But if we're drinking a lot, drinking excessively, then that probably over time it might help you feel less stress in the moment, but really over the long period will probably end up with more stress and a really damaging effect on our well-being. So it's really, in terms of these coping strategies, we're looking at what works right now, but over the long term, if we keep doing something, is that actually still serving us well? So for example, watching Netflix. Last night I chose to watch Netflix rather than spending time with my stepdaughter, who is absolutely delightful, but I really checked in with myself, and I didn't need more time with people. I actually needed to check out, and so watching Netflix made more sense. If I had an assignment that was due, and I started to binge watch Netflix, though, that might reduce my stress in the moment, but really the long-term stress is going to be so much worse. So really just checking with myself, is this the best stress-reducing strategy that I can use, or would I be better off, going and being with the horses or walking in nature or doing something creative, and then diving into the assignment or whatever I have to do. So again, there's not really right or wrong answers with how we do it. I think it's really wonderful to have like a toolbox of strategies that we use so we can pull out the right tool for the right situation. So I hope that makes sense. I realize I'm talking at you a lot today, but there we have it. So one of the purposes of us coming together today was this idea of most of us being maxed out with screen time and often not able to find a way clear of that. It can feel like we're just in this grind and just in survival mode, and everything seems important, and really hard to sort of step away. And I think it was someone said before about the pain cycle, and just like it's hard to escape that sometimes. I've been doing a lot of talk with students lately around the importance, we have to shift that on its head in order to do well. I really, really think we need to start to shift that and kind of reclaim our right to be away from screens. And it's not easy, it's really not easy, but I've come up with some tips for how we might manage this, and I'd be curious if anyone has any other tips you'd like to share in the chat box with each other as well about what's working well for you to help you manage your screen time. So as I'm going through these, maybe you could just start to reflect on what's worked for you, because we would love to share some other ideas, because I think it's really great if we can learn from each other. And a lot of these you will have heard before. They're not rocket science per se, but I think it would be good to just check in and say, okay, is there one thing here that maybe I know about but I haven't tried or haven't done for a while that we can maybe start to implement in our life? And I would recommend not trying to do all of these things, because oftentimes when we try to make huge change, we set ourselves up for failure rather than success. So oftentimes better to try to make small changes and then build on them. So maybe just think about picking one. So I'll go through them together. So we can try not to start and end your day with screens. I know often we pick up our phone and start scrolling through to see what's happening on social media or the news. And that's okay, but oftentimes it might put us a little bit on edge or not really set us off with the most balanced sort of emotional way of being through the day. And the same at the end of the day. I know there's a lot of talk about screens and bedtime and whether we should, whether it matters or not. But I mean, I think most people agree that if we try to put our screens away an hour at least before we are hoping to be asleep, that that's better for our brains and better for our circadian rhythms. So if you can, try it. That might be something to try and do. Usually need some intentionality, usually something like putting it in a room other than your bedroom with that thing. We also can start to recognize that just as there are different types of food, there are different types of screen time. So just as there are different types of food and the way they nourish us or not, some screen time is more nourishing than others. So what we can do with that is start to check in with ourselves and how we're feeling. Okay, how are you feeling when you're doing different activities online? Does some make you feel kind of happy and joyful, and then others kind of bring you down? So for example, a FaceTime with my family who are all in Australia right now actually brings me a lot of joy. I love that. But reading the news, not so much. Kind of makes me feel a little on edge. So I check in with my mood and limit the one and maybe do more of the other. So just really starting to, again, draw some intentionality to how you're using your screens and what effect that's having on you. Now, we can't always just do the nice things on the screen. Like I can't just spend my life, chatting with my family in Australia. I have to do my work. I have to, do some other important things like paying bills and stuff that require me to be on the screen. But it can be helpful to determine what's essential. Like, what are the essential things you have to do, and what are some of the things that maybe are not essential that you can maybe do otherwise? So as a student, one example might be, are you doing all of your readings on the screen? And is it possible that maybe you could take some of them offline? If you haven't already purchased textbooks, maybe purchase textbooks and read the actual hard copy. Or if you can decide on some of your readings to print out and read them. Sit in a different place in your house to get away from the screens, or go to the beach or the park or something to take a hard copy with you. Our brains react interact with hard copy reading materials differently to how they interact with the screen. So that actually might have an added bonus of helping you remember and retain information too. This thing in blue here, think of your free time as being divided into 3 C's of consumption, creation, and connection. And what serves you best online? And again, one of my colleagues brought this idea to my attention, and I thought this is a really neat idea: consumption, creation, and connection. What are you doing with your free time online? And then as well, I guess a straight this idea of consumption, creation, or connection in your free time. So is there a way that you can, do some consuming of something or creation of something or a connection that doesn't involve being online? That might be a way that you can step away from the screen for a moment as well. Recognizing the signs of stress scrolling and doom surfing. We saw a real uptick of that during the early stages of COVID, especially where people are just constantly scrolling through the news and reading more and more, and having this really adverse effect to mental well-being. So if you're finding yourself someone who's reading or consuming news multiple times throughout the day, and you're also having some anxiety or depression symptoms, that might be a bit of a cue that maybe a media diet might not be a bad idea. We just kind of really limit how much you're engaging with certain types of material. When it comes to schoolwork, I know we have this for most people's work. We start at a certain time, we end at a certain time, sort of. But with schoolwork, we don't really think about it that way, but it's incredibly important for our brains to have a break so they can recover and do what's called diffused thinking. So we tend to think about schoolwork as being really focused and really in the moment. And that is a really important part of schoolwork, but actually our brains need a chance to recover, they need a chance to diffuse, and so that diffused kind of state where ideas start to connect to themselves, and we start to decide what's really important to remember and what we can let go of. So stepping away from your computer screen gives our brains that break. So having a really defined finish time for schoolwork can be helpful for that. And the last one I know is, I sound like someone's broken record. I think we've heard this enough over the years, but try to set a time every day where you step away from your phone and your computer. And that sometimes is the hardest thing, but it can be so liberating. If you haven't done that already, try it if possible. Leave your phone at home, pretend you're in the 1980s and the phone was connected to the wall, and go for a walk or go to the shops or do something without your phone. And you might have a little bit of anxiety at first, but it can actually be quite liberating. So those are some of the tips that we have for you. What about you folks? What works for you to help you manage your screen time? Anyone have any ideas or anything you'd like to share with the other folks who are here today, or for the people who will be listening later? It's okay if you're feeling quiet as well. This is one of the hardest things. Again, I'm really aware that these things sound so easy when I say them. They're not easy to do. So just, I think the other point is just being gentle with ourselves and not beating ourselves up if we haven't figured this stuff out, because we're all just trying to figure it out as we go along as best we can. But maybe just focus on one thing that you can do to take away. So we draw our time together sort of into a to the point of this time together. We've talked about we talked about the importance of self-care and the intentionality that's really needed. We've talked about creating a routine. We've talked about some tools for how we might check in with ourselves about what we might need for our self-care, and obviously that changes and shifts over time as we change and shift over time, and as our lives shift and change over time. And then we've also talked about some of the ways that we can manage our stress. So we can bring that all together with this idea of creating a bit of a routine for self-care. And for those who are feeling like they don't have time for self-care, again, you're not alone with that, but I really encourage people to think about, if you don't have time, that's when you need it the most. But what you need is just a small foundation that we're just going to start to build. And the foundation gets built just one block at a time. And so when we're thinking about creating a routine for self-care, we're just considering what are some daily or weekly acts that you might be able to do that just, they don't take a lot of time, they don't have to take a lot of effort or planning or money or anything like that. Just what are some small considerations that you can do either every day or every week. And we're thinking about what helps you feel centered and grounded. So for me, for example, a cup of tea at 4 o'clock, really important part of my self-care routine. I've also added in most days, if I can, going for just a walk around the neighborhood before I start my work day. Interestingly, that's a shift for me. I used to go for a run a couple of times a week, but I've been listening and checking in with myself and going, okay, is the run what I really need, or do I need sort of, which takes a lot of time sometimes, but am I really craving just smaller amounts more often? And that's what I really have landed on, need smaller amounts more often to help me feel centered and grounded and good and well. So again, there's an idea of how this can shift and change. It's not prescriptive. But it's also really important to be spontaneous with self-care too. So we want to kind of think about a routine that we build that supports us, but also create some space in it for just maybe doing things a little bit differently or doing it when we want. Does anyone have a ritual or routine that they can share? It's like we've got some really interesting stuff in your lives that you're doing for stress reduction. Is there any routine that you can share with us to kind of give us some inspiration? Maybe in the chat box or on the microphone if you feel like you've had enough of hearing me talk. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Gratitude journal again. Just 3 things per day that you're thankful for. Lovely. Gratitude, expressing gratitude, making that a real practice has such beautiful mental health and well-being impacts on this. And certainly if we can build that practice, that's a really beautiful thing to do. Thank you for sharing. Great. Yeah, and that's okay too. Someone in the chat box has said regarding screen time, they have nothing concrete yet. Haven't figured out the puzzle. And you know, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's how a lot of us are feeling at the moment. Is we haven't quite figured out how we're going to get this routine of self-care going, especially when it comes to screen time. So I'm hoping that with the tips that I gave on the last screen, you can maybe take one of those away and just play around with it. I like to think of the idea of, you know, when people offer suggestions like myself, I'm offering some suggestions, is I think that it can be something you can play with, right? It doesn't have to be the answer, but play around with it and just see what works, what doesn't work. What are you going to take away and play with from today? So I really appreciate you sharing this hard stuff. Oh, and I should say too, if you're really struggling with some of this stuff too, that can be an indicator that maybe it's a good time to book an appointment and come and talk with one of us and see if we can help you find a pathway forward to manage some of these aspects that you're struggling with. Okay, so I think we have time for one more mindfulness exercise. So I'll take us through this one. And this, again, it's just a really simple thing that you can do. Oh, one more in the chat box. Try to look at the positive opposites, such as if I feel angry, I ask myself what I feel happy about. Nice. So it's like acknowledging one feeling that maybe we don't want to get stuck with for too long, and then going, what do we feel the opposite about? And just kind of really helping our brain to do the balancing act. Ah, beautiful. I love it. Thank you. That's a really great suggestion. Wonderful. So I'm going to come back to the mindfulness exercise here. This is something, again, that you can do pretty much anywhere, and it just incorporates some belly breathing, some intentional breathing, and then the idea of finding a rainbow about it, so it can help shift our focus when we're feeling kind of in the mire or in the stress of something. It can be helpful just to kind of help lift our gaze and spread our gaze around a little bit can help us feel grounded and realize that there's a bit more space around us than what we sometimes feel when we're really stressed. So the idea of this is we're just going to take some deep belly breaths, and with each of the breaths, I'm going to look around my space, and I'm going to find something in each of the colors of the rainbow. So I'll say mine, but I encourage you to do this with me if you can. Just pay attention, look in your room, look out the window, as far away as you can, just to kind of, well, close as you can, just to kind of get this experience. So I invite you just to, again, soften your gaze or close your eyes. Start to notice your breath. And as you start to deepen your breath, and I start to deepen my breath, we're going to take a deep breath in, and I'm going to look for something red. I notice the red spine on a book on my bookshelf. Take another deep breath in. I notice the orange of the sunset on the screen in front of me. Deep breath in. There's some cute little chicks that are yellow on my purse on the desk. Look out my window, and there's this beautiful green tree across my neighbor's yard. Beautiful today. I breathe in. And I notice the beautiful blue sky out my window as well. It's just so gorgeous here today. If I peer a little bit more closely, there's some purple flowers, so I'll call them indigo. Last one, breathe in. And I have some sticky notes that are kind of a violety color. So I hope you were able to join in with me as we found a rainbow. I know for me that it is just nice. It just broadened my gaze and gave me the opportunity to look out the window, which is, again, a really, I struggle to do that sometimes when focused on the screens. And from a purely practical perspective, it's so important. I know my optometrist was telling me recently this. She said the 20-20-20 rule. She says you should look away from your screen for 20 seconds at least, and look at least 20 meters away from your screen every 20 minutes. So I really try to keep her words of wisdom in my mind too. And I love this rainbow exercise because it kind of helps me to do that. It forces me to look out the window, which is kind of a nice added bonus. So as we're drawing our time together to a close now, I just invite you to check in with how you're feeling now after we've spent this hour together. Is there a face on the screen that matches, or is there a word you'd like to chat, pop in the chat box? Something that reflects how you're feeling right now in this moment. Feel free to grab a pencil and circle something, or chat in the chat box. We can also check in with our stress levels. And where on the scale are you sitting right now? Right now, at the end of a workshop, I'm feeling my stress levels have gone down just a little bit. So I'm sitting at a lovely 1.5. I really appreciate you showing up today and helping me get to that place by being really kind and thoughtful in the way that you interacted with me. I'm also feeling really happy as well that we get to spend this time together, and appreciate that someone else on the call is also feeling happy with me. So that's really great. So again, no right or wrong answers, just an opportunity to check in with ourselves. And I think even just a check-in like this can be just a gesture of self-care, just a gesture to say we're just paying attention to how we're doing, like we would a good friend. So on this slide, I'll show you how you can connect with us. So I feel so privileged to work with my wonderful colleague, Sarah Chattleborough. And we have a lovely practicum student who is, she's studying counselling through Yorkville University, so she really understands the student experience too, because she's living it. If you feel like it'd be helpful to book an appointment with us, we'd love to connect with you. You can email us by at counselling@royalroads.ca. And we'll email you back to set up an appointment, or you can book online from the counselling website. Just Google RIU Counselling and it'll take you straight to a website where you can see our calendars, or you can phone and leave a message and we'll phone you back to book an appointment. We don't usually pick up the phone just because we're in sessions most of the day. We will phone you back and book an appointment. At the moment, we're doing phone and Zoom, so we can connect with you wherever you're at. We'd love to talk to you about any of the struggles that you're or challenges that you're experiencing, and maybe help you find a way forward with that. So please don't be shy about reaching out, because we love the work that we do and we love connecting with students and having really beautiful, interesting conversations. So if it would be helpful, please let us know. Other than that, I just want to say a final thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing this time with me, whether you're in person or on the recording later. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day together. Bye for now.